Hello and welcome to Quiz Time. I'm Jess, and today I have a quiz all on 60s culture. So, do you know the events, the cars, the clothes of the time? Let's find out. What was the name of the NASA program that successfully landed the first humans on the moon in 1969? Apollo program, or Apollo 2 specifically, for the landing. Which iconic folk singer released the album The Freewheelin' in 1963, featuring the protest song Blowin' in the Wind? Bob Dylan. What was the name of the controversial CIA operation that attempted to overthrow the Cuban government in April 1961? Bay of Pigs invasion. Which band's 1966 album Pet Sounds revolutionized studio recording techniques and influenced the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's? The Beach Boys. What was the name of the iconic fashion boutique that opened on London's Carnaby Street in 1964 and helped define mod fashion? Bieber. What 1967 federal legislation prohibited discrimination in the sale and rental of housing? Fair Housing Act, or the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which Detroit record label founded by Berry Gordy Jr. was known as Hitsville, USA, and produced stars like The Supremes and Marvin Gaye. Motown Records. What was the name of the TV special where Elvis Presley made his comeback in December 1968, performing in a black leather outfit? Elvis, commonly known as the 68 Comeback Special. What psychedelic drug, known by its initials, was researched by the CIA in the early 1960s before becoming popular in counterculture? LSD. Which civil rights activist founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity and was assassinated in February 1965? Malcolm X. What was the name of the iconic minicar with British origins that became a symbol of the 1960s fashion and design? The Mini Cooper. Which 1967 movie starring Dustin Hoffman featured the line, "Mrs. Robinson, are you trying to seduce me? You're trying to seduce me, aren't you?" The Graduate. What was the name of the publication founded by Gloria Steinem in 1971 that became a voice for the feminist movement? Ms. Magazine. Which iconic 1960s muscle car was introduced by Ford as competition to the Corvette and featured in the Steve McQueen film Bullitt? Ford Mustang. What innovative musical, which opened on Broadway in 1968, featured nudity and the song Aquarius, Let the Sun Shine In? Hair. What was the name of the experimental community established in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district that organized the first human bee-in 1967? The Diggers. Which 1969 science fiction film directed by Stanley Kubrick featured HAL 9000, a sentient computer? 2001, A Space Odyssey. What nickname was given to the influential group of session musicians who played on many hits recorded in Los Angeles during the 1960s? The Wrecking Crew. What television comedy show debuting in 1968 broke new ground with its politically charged humour and counterculture perspective? Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. What was the original name of Muhammad Ali before he changed it in 1964? Cassius Clay. Which women's hairstyle characterized by substantial height and volume at the crown was popularized by Jacqueline Kennedy in the early 1960s? The Bouffant. What was the name of the controversial novel by Ken Kesey, published in 1962, that later became an Oscar-winning film? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Which specific guitar did Jimi Hendrix famously set on fire at the 1967 Monterey Pop Festival? Fender Stratocaster. What transportation infrastructure project, authorised in 1956 but largely built during the 1960s, transformed American mobility and urban development? Interstate Highway System. What was the name of the popular dance craze originating from a Chubby Checker hit song that swept America in the early 1960s? It was The Twist. Which groundbreaking situational comedy, premiering in 1968, featured television's first pregnant main character? Julia. What major electronics innovation of 1960 by Bell Labs revolutionized communication technology with its coherent light beam? The laser. What specific food product introduced by General Mills in 1964 featured a cartoon leprechaun and was magically delicious? Lucky Charms. What was the title of Rachel Carson's 1962 book that launched the modern environmental movement by exposing pesticide dangers? Silent Spring. Which comic book artist co-created many iconic Marvel characters in the 1960s alongside Stan Lee, including Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four? Jack Kirby. What specific brand of pantyhose, introduced in 1967, revolutionized women's legwear by eliminating the need for garters? Legs. What was the name of the 1960s architectural and interior design style characterized by plastic furniture, bold colours, and futuristic shapes? Space Age design or Atomic Age design? What specific Detroit muscle car introduced in 1964 is considered by many to be the first true muscle car? The Pontiac GTO. What was the name of the 1967 gathering in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park that marked the beginning of the Summer of Love? Human Being. Which specific synthetic fabric became immensely popular in the 1960s for its wrinkle-resistant properties and use in spacesuits? Polyester. What was the original purpose of the building that would later become Andy Warhol's factory studio in Manhattan? It was a hat factory. Which specific musical instrument prominently featured in the Doors' sound was relatively new to rock music in the 1960s? Moog synthesizer. What was the name of the magazine founded by John H. Johnson in 1945 that became an important voice for African Americans during the Civil Rights era? Ebony. Which specific surgical procedure, first performed successfully in 1967 by Dr. Christian Barnard, represented a major medical breakthrough? Heart transplant. What electronic music synthesizer invented in 1964 was first used on a pop record in the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations? Electro-theremin or tamarin? What was the name of the popular carbonated beverage introduced in 61 with the slogan, "Blasts your thirst away"? Sprite. Which specific amusement park attraction introduced by Walt Disney at the 1964 World's Fair featured animated figures singing It's a small world. It's a small world. There's no trick questions. What was the formal name of the report published in 1963 that concluded Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy? The Warren Commission report. Which specific watch design introduced by Bulova in 1960 was advertised as the world's first electronic watch? Acatron. What term was coined for young people who travelled across America in the 1960s in converted school buses and vans? Hippies. What was the name of the first communications satellite launched in 1962, which enabled the first live transatlantic television broadcast? Telstar. Which specific Detroit assembly line technique, expanded in the 1960s, revolutionized automobile manufacturing with its modular approach? Platform sharing. What was the name of the handheld camera introduced in 1965 that revolutionized documentary filmmaking with its portability? Sony Portapuck. Which specific type of skirt, rising to unprecedented heights in 1964, was named after the British designer who popularised it? The miniskirt designed by Mary Quant. What was the name of the best-selling diet book published in 1967 that advocated for low carbohydrate consumption? Mr. Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution. So, how did you do today? Drop your score in the comments below, and of course, like and subscribe so you get notified every time we post a new quiz. And join us next time on Quiz Time.